wanting is not so bad. Many people think that Buddhism, it's like we avoid it like the plague. It's not a bad thing. Especially when you take into account that many of us live life by default, in a sense. Living life by default. We like to think that we have a set plan for ourselves. We like to think that we have an agenda. Some of us have been lucky enough to have gone to school, have gone to college, maybe, graduate degrees or this and that, okay. So we must have a plan for ourselves, much like a business plan for our lives. But when we look at ourselves in a very, honest way, we see that oftentimes we are living our lives on automatic pilot. So how much of a deliberate attention is being granted to this thing, to this precious thing that we call our lives? And how often do we actually stop and think that it is precious to begin with? So these were some of the thoughts that were, running through my mind this week. And over the years, when I was a high school teacher, I would have students come up to me and ask, what should I do with my life? There's that beautiful word or phrase that Joseph Campbell used to say to his own students when they came to him, and they were much older, at the time, because he used to teach university, and he would always answer them the same way: follow your bliss. It's a beautiful statement. It inspired me so much in my life, and I never met Joseph Campbell. However, it did inspire me. Now, every once in a while, we have these beautiful moments in our lives where we stop by and make up our own lovely lists, which we call, New Year's resolution. That's like, rewind or reboot the system, as it were. Okay, it's good a lot, for a certain amount of time, fine. But we know it, who are we kidding? Oftentimes we're just back into that old groove of living a life that has been already set. And sadly enough, not by us. That's where we come back to living life by default. So when you walk away today from today's talk, I would like to have us walk away with a series of questions. And I just invite you to allow those questions perhaps every once in a while to kind of ring into your ears, and just how many of my choices are really my choices? Really? When you think about advertising agencies, they make probably trillions of dollars every year around the world in just telling people what choices to make, and then cashing in on the outcome of that, selling their products. And everyone is selling something, an idea, a thought. But how many of those thoughts are our thoughts that we do or commit ourselves to in our daily lives? That's my question to myself first, and then, I'm sharing that with you. So, another word for, I guess today's talk would be called freedom and attraction. Freedom and attraction. Attraction, it became a big phenomena thanks to the Abraham Hicks and Jerry and Esther Hicks, and then the Secret came out some years after that. It's a wonderful, I think, contribution to humanity, I think, because, when I was when I first came across that title, I was just like, but that's the first statement of the Dhammapada. Where your mind goes, where your thoughts are, that's where actions follow. The Buddha uses different similes, much like the ox cart follows the hoof of the ox that's drawing it. In the same way, the actions will follow your thoughts. In every culture, every part of the planet, you have different similes, stories, parables, etc., symbols. But when we think about it, yeah, these are lovely things to be reminded of, and just kind of take a moment of your busy day and say, yeah, that's lovely, but then go back to your normal routine. Deliberate action is really not easy. In the beginning, like anything else, like learning a new skill. If you ask any apprentice who's learned a skill or a new language, it's not easy in the beginning. But you're so surrounded on a daily basis with different influences that are coming in to try to drag you away from actually sticking to what you initially had thought about. So yeah, every once in a while we do have retreats, and if we're lucky enough, the instructor or the meditation teacher might go over the Eightfold Path or the Four Noble Truths. Great. But it's very difficult for us to actually maintain those. The first of the Eightfold Path starts with right view, or harmonious perspective. To have that clear understanding which follows, and then to go to the right speech, right action, all these things. It was like, but how often are we doing that? The Buddha, before he passed away, his students came by and said, something along the lines of like, is the Dhamma going to be available? And what is awakening? What is enlightenment? This and that. And the Buddha is like, I'm not going to get into an argument. I'm about to, go into Parinibbana here. Haven't you been listening for 45 years? And he does not give him an extra like secret teaching, for the last few listeners there. He just goes back to the Eightfold Path and he says, as long as the Eightfold Path is still available, one, as long as the Eightfold Path is being taught properly, that's two, and as long as humanity is still practicing the Eightfold Path, the earth will never be short of having arahants, fully awakened people. And that gives me hope. And it's a wonderful thing. I mean, we don't need to have hope in a sense, because we can actually see the benefits of it on a daily basis if we go back to our wants, which is the word that I'm using today a lot, because I think it needs to be normalized in our lives. The word desire is always kind of shunned in Buddhist circles. But when you look at it, the Buddha never said desire is bad. He termed two. He coined two terms actually, wholesome and unwholesome, kusala and akusala. And that goes for thoughts, words, and actions. So there's a wise or skillful way, or upaya, in many circles we use that word. Upaya is a skillful means of doing something. It's a wise way of handling, taking care of your life, depending on the context, depending on the situation, or what needs to be done. So when you have let's narrow it down to something that's in bits or chunks that you can actually process and benefit from. So let's start with the morning. What do we do when we get up in the morning? Usually we're just surrounded with the garbage bags of yesterday's memories, especially the ones that we went to bed with. And that's why they're surrounding us when we wake up. When I used to train people, to lose weight or build their bodies, this and that, I would just tell them, I want you to wake up, before you even open your eyes, I want you to smile. Like, why? Because I want you to smile. There's actual processes that take place within the brain that's connected to your facial muscles, especially the corners of your lips. My meditation students know this. Every time you raise the edges of your lips, there's a part of the brain that lights up. It says, hey guys, something's going on, we don't know what it is, but there's definitely something pleasant and joyful or delightful happening in front of us, but we're too lazy to pick it up, so let's release those wonderful hormones and chemicals in the brain. They've done research in Indiana University and Hamburg, Germany on this. They had university students actually walk around with a pencil that they were just doing this with, which mimics the smile. And they were recording these students, brain waves, and they were seeing what was happening, and it was quite incredible for them to discover that the brain was faking being happy because of these muscles, and they were not asked to think about pleasant thoughts. They were just mimicking the muscular formations, let's say, given that action. And the odd thing was they also did the reverse of that, where they had a different experiment where they were frowning. So they had the muscles of the face in the frowning motion with the eyes, the eyebrows, everything else. And they noticed that the cortisol levels in the brain were increasing, which is a stress hormone, which happens when you are not feeling okay. You're under stress or duress, or you're sad, you're depressed as a result of anxiety, etc. Something that all of us are familiar with, especially living in a place like Los Angeles. So the brain was indirectly being influenced in both cases. So, someone asked me, so do you mean to say that we need to fake it until we make it? Yeah, why not? I mean, who's the beneficiary of that? I mean, you're not being delusional. What I'm saying, in the morning when you wake up, starting with a smile is actually one of the greatest things you could do. Obviously, drinking water. These are normal, everyday life, I wouldn't even say advice, but definitely guidelines that we can all live by. But we definitely can benefit from. See, as a Dharma teacher, we're not necessarily only going to talk about how to decipher the 12 links of causal relations or the different principles, of the Dharma. Yes, that's one of our, of course, duties. However, the Buddha, we always go back to the Buddha as our example. For 45 years, he was not just elaborating and expositing on the higher meanings of the Dharma, for example. He was also talking to farmers about grains. He was also talking about situations. He was talking to courtesans who were coming in wanting to learn about life and why do we suffer. And is there such a thing as happiness? Happiness that can be maintained. So he would talk about normal everyday situations that people could relate to, and from that they would change their lives, enough so that their minds, their lives, in fact, would be influenced. And one of the key factors that are necessary in order for there to be a smile on your face and in your life, in a sense, joy, is the tranquility of mind. So if we are to go back to wanting or desiring something in our lives, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, is the tranquility of one's own mind. I first mentioned this to a student, and she's a single mom. And she has an autistic child. And she was having problems with her boss. the boss, she was really mistreating her. And so she didn't know where to go. She didn't know what to do. She was frustrated because she wasn't getting enough income. The state was not helping her child with the added support that he desperately needed, being an autistic child. So all these things were happening, and I said, I need you to go back and make a list of things to be grateful for. She's like, are you kidding me? I have nothing to be grateful for. And I said, oh yeah? So I quickly listed some of the things that I briefly remembered from her life that she had told me. And she's like, okay, fine, I get it. So she made a whole list. And I said, I want you to focus on one thing though, that you want the most. Well, I want the most for my son. I said, I understand that. You're a mother, you're a loving mother, and I know that. But there's something more important than that. And I was just like, what? There's nothing more important than that. I would give my life to my son. And I said, I don't doubt that for a second. But I said, there's something even more. I was like, what? Your tranquility of mind. She's like, nah. If we don't have a tranquility of mind, we don't have anything. You can't even look at your partner with loving eyes. It's impossible. Because you won't be there, able to even understand what love is, or experience it. You can't even take care of your body if we don't have a tranquility of mind, because it's all over the place. You won't be able to understand a single phrase, any advice. Appreciation, forget it. Gratitude, out the door. Enjoyments, none of that. Fun, doesn't exist. So when we talk about tranquility of mind, I don't want you to think about like this tiny little hut or meditation hall somewhere in the Himalayas, covered up in snow with gurus sitting around you, and there's like in this sublime jhanic state. That's absurd. Tranquility of mind really shows up when we are in the nitty-gritty things of our lives. When it's so dynamic and you can't tell what from, who from who, whatever. It's so mind-bogglingly chaotic. And that's where it matters. Now, whatever you may use, whether it's the breath, whether it's metta practice, whether it's sensations of the body, or just any part of the satipatthana where you're observing the feelings, nature of the feelings, or the mind, or the dharmas. It really does not matter. As long as you're able to come to that restful collectedness state of mind. And that is the ground upon which you can actually build your day. And this is where that list that we were talking about comes in handy. So it's a good idea to have a list. If you've made that list, back in, December 31st or January 1st, put that right there, tape it right next to, even at the same height, level of, your eyes when you get up at the edge of your bed. Let's say if you're sleeping on a bed, it's right there on the wall, and you look at it, it's unavoidably there, staring in your face. And read a few of those. But make sure that when those wants or list items are being put down on this sheet of paper, they really come from here. They really mean something to you. And that's where the value of deliberate intention come in. The value of it. And yes, you're right, because it also involves responsibility. See, relinquishing our right to choose, and that's where the freedom part of this talk comes in, really involves a lot of us taking responsibility for what it is that we want. Wanting is not a passive thing. Yeah, I mean, it is in a sense when you compare it to the action portion of it, fine. But even to sit down and to make up your mind about something requires some deliberate action, which is connected to the Eightfold Paths portion of right action or harmonious activity, depending on how you want to see it. But there's definitely intentional, deliberate action. And the Buddha had several different ways of explaining effort. For example, there's 4 aspects of effort, 4 right efforts he called it. But the one that really stood out for me to kind of present or represent in in today's talk have to do with the 4 bases of power. Now, there's 2 aspects of these. There's one that's called Lokiya. Lokiya means mundane, having to do with this world. And there's Lokuttara. Lokuttara means supramundane, some things that actually are related with the actual experiencing of Nibbana, to cut the cord of samsara fully. So the practicality of the Dhamma is also seen here in the mundane aspect of these 4 bases of power. In Pali they're called Iddhipada. Iddhi usually stood for supernatural powers or extra, sensory, or whatever you want to call it. But it's basically unusual. And sometimes you see it also in people who have such focus. Like I once saw this guy on TV who was making like statues at the edge of, with the pencil's edge. He was able to carve characters from movies onto the edge of a single pencil, a lead pencil. That is really remarkable. That has pretty much all of the aspects of 4 bases of power that I'm going to be talking about. So it doesn't have to be out of this world type of a thing. So each of us have our own ways of uniquenesses, I guess, I'm making up words here, but basically you understand it's like an almost unusual level of being prowessness, skilled. In Chinese it's called kung fu. That's being extremely masterful at something. So the first one is Chanda Samadhi. Chanda is also desire, the wanting of this talk, if you want to think about it. The coordination of the synonym of it would be Chanda. Now, Chanda can be also seen by some as a negative desire, something like unwholesome desire. But in this case, when we're talking about the 4 bases of power, we're talking about that intention, that desire, that wanting, that you sat down and said, what do I need in my life to be happy? Get a better body, if we're ill, if we're sick. Something, not as extreme as that, and not as important as that, for example, learning a language. I want to learn Italian. Okay. I love Italian. I just want to learn Italian. Okay. Is that what you really, really want deep down? Does that make you happy? Yes. Okay, fine. That can become an intention, for example. So these are just examples, of course. The second one is the Virya Samadhi. Virya is energy, is the perseverance aspect of it. How much force do you put behind that intention, that push that it needs? And then next to that, after that is Chitta Samadhi. Chitta can be the mind or the mood of the mind. Now these are not separate from each other in a sense. Basically they are backing each other up. They're making that initial intention or desire get closer and closer to be real, materialized. And then finally the 4th one is Vimamsa. Vimamsa means investigation. Checking to see if you've kind of moved aside, like gone astray from that intention, that original deliberate thought or desire that you had. So when we use these 4, or when we think about, okay, which aspect or how can, I mean, this is something new that we have to do, I will beg to differ. Because these are things that we've actually had one or two, if not more, hopefully more, occasions in our lives where we've utilized these for. So what I'm asking for is if we can introduce these bases into other aspects of our lives in a more continuous, deliberate fashion. But again, the importance of establishing the intention is extremely important, which requires us to get off of our automatic pilot mode. And that takes some responsibility, that takes some courage. Especially in this society where we're constantly being fed information, constantly being told what to think, what to choose, what to eat. In this past year, I was volunteering at a school, and it was very interesting because as you left the gates of the school, later on, they had these huge billboards right there where kids would, teenagers, especially the junior and high school kids, the seniors, they would be, about to leave campus, and they had, it was unavoidable. It was almost bigger than the sky when you looked at the sky from that angle. And I won't say which organization, but this huge, very well-funded organization was displaying a major advertisement for these kids to be exposed to for months on end. These kids already, they're in a confused state. They're trying to understand who they are. They're trying to understand independence and making up their personalities and characters or characteristics. And all of a sudden you present that. So we are being taught from a very young age what to choose and how to lead our lives. And is that what we would want to see when we look back later on, when we're about to breathe our last breath, after living through so many situations in our lives? See, the very last moment in our tradition, it's crucial, the very last thoughts that we have, especially the feelings that we have before we close our eyes for the very last time in this birth. It's very important. Just like establishing that tranquility of mind is extremely important to establish at the beginning of your day. So if I were to think about the morning, you rising up in the morning and establishing your mind, which is one of the reasons why meditation teachers always say, sit, meditate in the morning. Because that kind of sets you back. It's like rebooting the system, right? So what you're doing then is intentionally creating that space. So no matter what happens during the day, you could go back to that tranquil state of mind and get some respite, get some it's not all bad type of a mood you put yourself into. So if that was the beginning of your life, imagine the ending of your life at that moment. To live like that would just ensure that there's going to be much less suffering to deal with. Perhaps even awakening can happen, depending on how often you went over that mindset during your life. But your life can be for another, like 50, 60, 70, hopefully 100 years, meaningfully lived, 60, 100 years. But how often are we going to be able to bring ourselves into that mode of thinking during the day? Because this is our practice. This is our boot camp every single day. The more you do that, and that's the hard part in the beginning, just like learning any skill, like I was saying in the beginning. Like learning any skill, in the beginning it takes a little bit of effort. But the more we do, ask any meditator, ask anyone who is skilled at something, they will say the same thing. Right? So the more we bring ourselves to that tranquil state of mind where we are re-energizing ourselves with the thoughts of, okay, what is it that I really want in my life? And by the way, there's nothing wrong with going back to that list and scratching some of them off, because you just developed a certain sense of awareness that you see, you know what, this does not match with who I am. And that's totally fine. So feel free, because this is your choice. That's the freedom of choice we were talking about. Where you can remove some and add some, but make sure it's yours. Your choice. Make it deliberate. So, and that allows us to prioritize our lives with our wants. So just ask yourself a couple of times during the week how much of your life is really being lived by default, which is a passive way of living. You're just letting things happen to you instead of being aware of, okay, how, even asking that question removes you from that passive autopilot position. Just asking that question. So I know Bhante is, yeah. So we have questions, right, Bhante? For yes. A few questions. So thank you for listening, first of all. Questions? Not all at once, but yes.
More of a comment. I do like that you're sort of taking back want as something that we're okay with using, because it seems like sometimes we get scared with that word want, desire, be kind of tricky, and I think part of that might just be like a translational thing, because when things get translated from, say, Pali into English, they'll talk about desire when they maybe mean like craving or something like that, or like real deep clinging, and so
yes.
Because we use desire in a much more passive way in English, I think, too. Like, man, I really desire a pizza right now. And everyone knows exactly, they don't think like, man, this guy needs a pizza right now. They're like, no, he wants a pizza. But when it's being used that way in, say, maybe a sutta, that's not the kind of desire they're talking about. So we can still talk about wants, especially thinking the way you're talking about like these wholesome, the
yes.
wants. And so I was actually very glad to hear you say that. He's like, oh, hey, I think that too.
Well, the Buddha himself, he had desires. He had to have desire, first of all, to become a Buddha, even in his last life. As, you know, Bodhisattva, he turned into a Buddha because of his desires. So one of the interesting suttas that I've come across is the Dvavitaka Sutta. I think it's chapter, the Sutta number 19 of Majjhima Nikaya, where he goes and says, well, when I was still on my path to become enlightened, I saw my thoughts. And I said, you know what, I'm going to actually make two piles. Two piles. One pile will be the akusala, unwholesome thoughts and desires, wanting to hurt someone, this and that, whatever. And one that's kusala, which is wholesome. And guess what? After I've put each one in their own particular pile, I'm going to get rid of the akusala. I'm not going to be doing the akusala ones. And I'm just going to focus, prioritize on these ones. And that's how I live my life. And I thought, genius. Simple, elegant, genius. That's perfect. How often can I do that? That was my question during the day. So the more we do this, the more it becomes a normal activity. So perfect. No, yeah, comment for that. Yes?
So you said at one point that the key was to establish your own intention. I'm curious about these desires that we have or what we want. Even if I know 100% clear-eyed, this is what I want to be happy in life. And where is that wanting or desire coming from? It doesn't matter if it's wholesome or unwholesome. You know, it almost feels like these desires we're kind of, they just happen to us. You know, born with brown eyes, I have these desires and I decide intentionally to follow them or not. But to have them in the first place, I might say I'll be happy. What will really make me happy is if I become a missionary. Or I might say what will really make me happy is if I become a teacher. but where did that wanting to be a missionary or a teacher come from? And they're both wholesome, right? But so how am I free? Like, wouldn't I need to be free from my own desires as well to then decide what it is that I really want to do with my life to be happy? You know, does that make sense?
I'm trying to wrap my mind around your question, and it has so many tangents to it. But please, I mean,
just try one more.
No. I get the gist of it. The thing that we need to, it has to do with what Stephen was just saying, with the akusala portion of it. Desire, again, is not something bad that we need to run away from. That's one. It is how much of that desire turning into craving, which is causing us to have being latched on to this past moment and past thoughts and ideas and dreams and expectations and all that stuff that go with it. So basically, we're no longer here living in the present moment. We are basically being like pulling in, hauling, just things from our past. And who knows how much of the brown-eyed thing, how much of the be this son, be that daughter, be this good student, all of that have really anything to do with us. Happiness is a state that, you know, sukha is the Pali word for it, that all beings crave and want. If you even go back to the most basic forms of bacteria, they're trying to find order, to make order. They're basically trying to get out of suffering. They might not know it, they're not cognizant of it, but when they're coming together, when you see an anthill, all of a sudden, what is that? They just made themselves safer from the outside environment. You see a badger or any animal, a bird building a nest. They're trying to make themselves comfy, less prone to dangers. Safe, security. It is no wonder that the Dhamma or the triple gem or even Nibbana is the ultimate form of safety that we aspire to. So we have that. I'm trying to answer your question through using biology and coming back to the Dhamma. We have that forward motion or forward moving, I wouldn't say intentional, but definitely the drive is there to go from, you know, the disorderliness, chaotic state of affairs to one that is the opposite of that. However, we're living in a world, in a system where one of the thermodynamic principles says things move from a state of orderliness to disorderliness. You look at a mountain peak, and then you look at the bottom of the, you know, sea level, and you see that mountain will eventually turn into the tiny little grains of sand. So that is what you're working in a way against. To try to find yourself being happy. Unfortunately, because of anicca is the impermanence, one of the three declarations the Buddha made at the night of his enlightenment. He said everything is impermanent, which causes suffering. You're holding your loved one, you know very well that, oh my God, this person is not going to be there forever. What about that love that I'm feeling right now? What's going to happen to that? My skin, my face, my body. Oh, I like what I see, but oh, it's going to wither and die. Now, the Buddha said, you can't change one of these, but you can change the other one. My attachment to this body, the craving, which is the negative aspect of the desire, that you can change. But the eyes turning brown, this and that, those are natural, they follow a different, natural laws that move from orderliness to disorderliness. That we don't even concern ourselves with, other than just securing our normal, day-to-day needs, etc. But let us move towards gaining that state of happiness, the unconditioned state of Nibbana, which is not something archaic, something that's, you tell at nights, around a campfire. It doesn't happen. It happens. Nibbana does happen 26 centuries after the Buddha's enlightenment. It does. So I hope that.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Do we have time? Or
Yes.
yes. I'm still going to be here right after the service, so I'll answer. Is it a short one or?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'll just say the question.
Yeah.
When you were talking about how the Buddha made two piles of thoughts, wholesome and unwholesome, I was.
He wasn't Buddha then.
Yes. Okay. So I was thinking, in our day-to-day lives, does it always take a crisis to bring us to the realization that we have to sort of step aside and watch our thoughts, or is there a less painful way to realize that you really have to watch your thoughts?
That's a very good question. Fortunately, the answer is no. It doesn't necessarily have to involve you facing a catastrophe to make to come. But it requires wisdom to be able to look at normal situations and say, okay, why am I making this a big deal or a bigger deal than it is? So that takes some level of awareness and skillful way of thinking through, which can help you with distinctions without needing the outside world to kind of reflect it or put an extra impingement on your life where you're just like, oh, I have to do something. It's really messy. So life does not have to be messy for us to make the right choice, if that makes sense. But I will be more than glad to address it further after the ceremony. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.